Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave,
on behalf of every father and every mother,
wings for freedom. On behalf
of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a great show for you today. If you could show your support, please do hit the like button and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Helps us out, helps spread the word. We also have a Twitter and a Blue Sky account. We post some updates there, so if you are so inclined, you can check those out. And of course, we have our website, Tochnyi.info. That's where we post all of our great research and articles and interactive maps and all kinds of cool stuff. So check out Tochnyi.info for more detailed information about the stuff you heard today. If you guys have any questions in chat, as always, you can ask any questions. We'll have a Q&A at the end. So first, I'll present the news. That'll be followed by our report on the Russian economy with Stanimir, and then we will have an update on Konstantynivka with our colleague Audax, which is going to be great. So stay tuned, and it's going to be a good show. I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of March 1st, 2026. First up, we have operations. High-resolution satellite imagery indicates that a strike on the Iskander missile production facility damaged the galvanic and metal stamping workshop. This assessment was reported by analysts from Cyberbaroshno. According to their analysis, the Flamingo missile struck the Votkinsk plant, tearing a large opening in the workshop roof roughly 30 by 24 meters in size. Specialists observed that the way the structure collapsed and the overall damage pattern indicate the blast originated within the building rather than on the exterior. The internal detonation appears to have burned through the interior spaces extensively. Earlier claims that workshops number 22 and 36 had been hit were revised, with analysts concluding that the impact actually struck the number 19 building, which houses the galvanic and stamping operations. This workshop is responsible for shaping and pressing metal, producing components for missile bodies, and applying galvanic treatments such as protective and functional coatings. It also prepares surfaces for final assembly of weapon systems. Disruption to this facility is considered particularly serious because it performs and prepares the core structural elements of missile casings before they move on to assembly. Damage here could significantly interrupt the manufacturing process. By the fall of 2022, the plant had completed construction of a new galvanic section covering about 3,000 square meters to boost output capacity. Workers at the time emphasized that galvanic processing is essential for most of the plant's products and that the entire facility had been awaiting the launch of this new section. The Votkinsk plant is one of Russia's primary sites for producing solid fuel ballistic missiles. It manufactures RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missiles in series, continues maintenance on Topol systems, and builds RSM-56 Bulava missiles launched from submarines. Beyond nuclear delivery systems, the facility also produces missiles for the Iskander-M, the Kinjal, and the Oreshnik. In addition, it manufactures equipment for oil, gas, and nuclear industries. The enterprise is currently subject to sanctions imposed by the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Switzerland, Australia, Japan, and Ukraine. Ukrainian defense forces struck critical components of the Neftogorsk gas processing plant, damaging systems essential for its operation and rendering the facility unable to function normally. Imagery indicates that 2 vertical stabilization columns at the site were hit. These large processing units play a central role in treating raw hydrocarbons by separating lighter fractions from oil and gas condensate, ensuring the material meets required standards for transport. Damage to these columns disrupts the plant's core technological processes, making it difficult to continue operations and potentially forcing a full shutdown of production. Additional harm was likely inflicted on technical columns and pipelines used to channel excess gases and lighter components into flare systems for emergency burning. These systems are vital for safe pressure management and operational stability. Without this equipment, the facility cannot return to standard functioning. Repairs may be slow and expensive due to international sanctions and restricted access to specialized technologies and replacement parts. The attack occurred overnight on February 21st when drones struck the complex. After the explosions, images and video shared online showed a large fire engulfing sections of the plant. The Neftyagorsk facility processes associated petroleum gas from oil fields across the Volga region, primarily operations run by Samara Neftgaz. Its design throughput is about 0.7 to 0.75 billion cubic meters of gas annually. Together with the nearby Otradnensky gas processing plant, it forms part of Rosneft's Samara gas processing network, which has a combined capacity of roughly 1.5 to 1.9 billion cubic meters per year. Up next, we have economy and aid. The International Monetary Fund has approved a new 4-year extended fund facility for Ukraine totaling $8.1 billion, with an initial disbursement of about $1.5 billion expected in the near future. The funds are intended to help cover the country's budget shortfall and maintain overall financial stability during the ongoing strain on public finances. The IMF-backed arrangement forms part of a wider financial plan aimed at addressing a projected state budget deficit of $136.5 billion over the next 4 years. Negotiations over the agreement had stretched on for months and at times involved politically sensitive issues. Ukraine and the IMF had reached preliminary terms in November of 2025, which included 16 structural reform targets for the government and parliament, along with 4 mandatory steps that had to be completed before the program could begin. These preliminary requirements sparked controversy. They included plans to introduce value-added tax obligations for individual entrepreneurs, apply duties to incoming parcels, levy taxes on digital platforms, and preserve the wartime military surcharge. In December of 2025, the Finance Ministry proposed legislation that would have required individual entrepreneurs earning more than 1 million hryvnia annually to pay VAT. The proposal triggered public opposition. Officials subsequently began working on a revised version that would raise the income threshold to either 2 or 4 million hryvnia per year. The impasse was ultimately resolved in another way. On February 14th, the Prime Minister informed journalists that the IMF had agreed to remove all 4 preliminary conditions from the new loan program, eliminating the proposed VAT requirement for small business operators, as well as the other measures that had delayed approval. On the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion, Canada unveiled a new military assistance package for Ukraine valued at about $1.4 billion and announced additional sanctions targeting Russia. The funding, which is allocated for the 2026 to 27 fiscal year, is intended to bolster Ukraine's defensive capacity and support its armed forces as fighting continues. The package includes the delivery of 400 armored vehicles. Among them are 66 light armored vehicles manufactured by General Dynamics, as well as 383 Senator armored personnel carriers produced by the Canadian firm Rochelle. The defense minister also confirmed that Operation Unifier, Canada's program for training Ukrainian troops, will be extended for 3 more years, continuing through 2029. In addition to military aid, Canada will contribute another $20 million to Ukraine's Energy Support Fund. Canada also expanded its sanctions regime, targeting 21 individuals, 53 organizations, and 100 vessels associated with Russia's shadow fleet. In coordination with partners, Canada further reduced the price cap on Russian crude oil from $47.6 to $44.1 per barrel. Also on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, the UK and Australia announced extensive new sanctions aimed at nearly 480 individuals, organizations, and vessels connected to Russia's wartime economy. The British measures, described as the most extensive since the initial phase of the invasion, introduced close to 300 new sanctions listing. A central target is PJSC Transneft, one of the world's largest pipeline operators, which handles the majority of Russia's exported crude shipments. The sanctions also focus on systems developed to bypass earlier restrictions. Authorities in London imposed penalties on 175 companies associated with the Two Rivers oil network, identified as a major operator of the Shadow Fleet vessels and a significant trader of Russian crude. An additional 48 oil tankers were also designated. Beyond the oil sector, the measures extend to 49 individuals and organizations linked to the supply of goods, components, and technologies used in Russian drones and weapon systems. 3 civilian nuclear energy companies seeking contracts for new Russian-built nuclear projects abroad were also targeted. Further sanctions were applied to 6 entities connected to Russia's liquefied natural gas sector, including vessels, trading firms, and export terminals, as well as 9 Russian banks involved in the processing of international payments. A Ukrainian defense minister has begun operating in the United Kingdom, producing drones that Ukrainian officials say have demonstrated strong performance in modern technology-driven combat. The development was announced on February 25th by Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhny. The ambassador did not disclose specific drone models, but said the decision to establish production by the company Ukrspec Systems in Britain carries a significant strategic importance, particularly for integrating Ukrainian capabilities into the British defense sector. Earlier reporting indicated that the company, described as Ukraine's largest drone producer, had committed about £200 million or $270 million to build a factory along with a testing and training facility in eastern England. The ambassador emphasized that opening the facility abroad does not mean relocating production away from Ukraine. Instead, it is intended to broaden joint capacity with partners and establish additional manufacturing bases that can ensure output continues even if domestic facilities face disruptions. The move comes as Ukrainian defense firms increase production at home despite ongoing threats from aerial strikes. In order to secure additional funding and accelerate output, many companies are partnering with Western allies, exchanging technical expertise and operational knowledge gained from battlefield use. At the time of the announcement, Ukrspecs Systems had not published an official statement on its website confirming the launch of production in the UK. Up next, we have international relations. The U.S. State Department delivered a formal diplomatic message to Ukraine following a Ukrainian strike on the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk, urging Kyiv to avoid actions that affect American interests. Ukraine's ambassador to Washington described the communication as an official démarche and said her government had acknowledged it, although she did not specify whether she had been formally summoned or how the message was conveyed. U.S. officials have declined to comment publicly on the matter. According to the ambassador, the outreach came because the attack disrupted economic activities involving the United States and Kazakhstan. Much of Kazakhstan's oil exports passed through Novorossiysk, and operations at the port were briefly suspended after the drone strike. She emphasized that the message was not a request to stop targeting Russian military or energy facilities in general, but was specifically tied to the impact on foreign economic interests connected to the site. The ambassador said the episode highlighted Ukraine's limited economic integration with the United States since gaining independence after the Soviet Union's collapse, and stressed her intention to strengthen those ties. She argued that building substantial American economic involvement with Ukraine would serve as a powerful long-term security guarantee alongside efforts to work with Washington toward a negotiated settlement. So this is just a little bit of editorializing from me, but I think that's diplomacy speak for if we had significant economic interests of the United States in Ukraine, they might be telling things like this to Russia. And the last item this week, the UN General Assembly approved a resolution titled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine on February 24, 2026, with 107 countries voting in favor, reflecting a notable increase in backing compared with the 93 votes recorded in the previous year. Prior to the main vote, the Assembly rejected a proposal from the United States to remove references to territorial integrity and adjust peace from the text. That proposal was defeated by 69 votes against, with only 11 countries supporting it. As the war enters its fifth year without a ceasefire, despite ongoing trilateral negotiations promoted by Washington, the vote was seen as a test of whether global support for Ukraine's territorial integrity would endure amid pressure to soften that position as part of efforts to reach a settlement with Moscow. The vote took place during the resumed 11th emergency special session of the General Assembly. The resolution passed with 107 votes in favor, 12 opposed, and 51 abstention. Most European states supported the measure, joined by countries including Australia, Israel, Thailand, Mexico, Nigeria, and many others. Opposition came from Russia and a group of allied states such as Belarus, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Nicaragua, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Burundi, Eritrea, and Sudan. Several major countries, including the US, China, Brazil, India, Kazakhstan, and Hungary, chose to abstain. The adopted text calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, a complete exchange of prisoners of war, and the release of civilians who have been unlawfully detained or transferred. It reaffirms Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity in its internationally recognized borders. Before the final vote, the U.S. delegation sought to remove the sections emphasizing sovereignty and territorial integrity. A deputy representative argued that such language could complicate ongoing diplomatic efforts rather than facilitate broader negotiations. The proposal failed to gain support, with most member states voting it down and many others abstaining. Ukraine's deputy foreign minister warned that the provisions targeted for removal reflected the core principles of state sovereignty and territorial integrity. Weakening them would signal that these foundational norms could be treated as negotiable. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment. Okay, so the next segment is our update on the Russian economy with Stanimir. So, Stanimir, I just wanted to cover very quickly that there was a recent hubbub where Russia was charging the founder of Telegram, Pavel Durov, with facilitating terrorism, and it's continuing their kind of attempt to clamp down on this communications app. So, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about that and just the general state of the Telegram ban.
Yes, the general state is that we get repeated repeated stories from Russian news outlets that Telegram is probably going to be shut down from April 1st or from April at some point, but that's what we're hearing. This is, again, part of an attempt to induce terrorism charges against the app. They've actually tried to link him to the Crocus city hall attack, where ISIS attacked a music hall in Russia. They've tried to incriminate him in Ukrainian assassinations of Russian figures, so Daria Dugina, Russian generals, that sort of thing. I think you shouldn't look at this beyond just another attempt to silence Telegram as a whole in Russia and move on to Max for everyone. I don't know, however, how we're going to track a lot of the developments on the Russian side afterwards if they all move to Max, because to get access to Max, you actually need a Russian telephone or a Russian SIM card and maybe even a Russian citizenship in the future. So that's an interesting thing to look into, how people are going to get access to Max to continue tracking channels that publish Russian news on the front.
And I think Durov kind of represents an archetype in Russian, the Russian economy, right? He's relatively young tech guy who created a major software platform. And I don't know, does this crackdown on Durov personally have any? Do you think it'll have any long-term impact on this side of the Russian economy, or do you think that we're leaving the era of the Russian tech startup type oligarch?
Well, Durov didn't launch one platform; he launched multiple ones. I have to point out that VKontakte was his idea, or his and his brother's idea. It was their company, and they were forced to sell it in Russia and leave the country and relocate to the United Arab Emirates to then start Telegram. So the clampdown on Russian tech startups has started a long time ago, and it's only continuing. I don't think there's going to be independent tech entrepreneurs in Russia in the foreseeable future. If Putin stays in power, because we saw even the rather docile founder of Yandex, who helped create what Russians call the digital gulag, being forced to sell his company and move to the Netherlands, even though he was kind of a loyal trooper to the regime. So I don't think that there's going to be an independent tech company in Russia. Yandex is currently a private company, but it was sold with the blessing of the Kremlin. So basically, who got to buy shares was arranged by the Kremlin, and the CEO of the company was chosen by the Kremlin. So this is a similar thing is happening in VKontakte, which is part of Mail.ru. So yeah, Russia's social media and Russia's IT startups are going to lose their independence if they haven't lasted already.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we can now move to your general update.
Yeah, and something to mention first in regards to the events of the last 2 days. There are around 50,000 Russian tourists currently stuck, as the Russian Association of Tour Operators is calling it, in the United Arab Emirates. For some of them, now I have to point out these are the richer parts of Russia, so you shouldn't be that worried about them. But for some of them, the decisions made on the ground by the United Arab Emirates, emirate by emirate, are having an effect. I think in Dubai, the authorities are not extending their hotel stays, so they're getting evicted from hotels if they overstayed their booking. In other emirates like Abu Dhabi, they're actually getting extensions, so they're keeping them inside hotels. I think around 8,000 were supposed to depart over this weekend back to Russia. So that should be the indicative number of how many people are subject to being kicked out of their hotel rooms. They may have some restrictions on transferring money, which might make it harder for them to actually get a place to stay. But again, this is part of the richer strata of Russia, so you shouldn't really be that worried about them. And also, I think there is a cruise ship that is also stuck with a lot of Russian tourists, which was supposed to move to Doha as part of a cruise in the Gulf Coast. So I think that's the extent to which Russians are directly impacted by what's happening. And of course, all the flights to the Middle East, almost all the flights are being canceled right now. Beyond that, I have to point out that this week we got the industrial output news for the month of January. I think Erlend has a copy of it. And I want to point out a few things. If we look at the civilian economy, that is everything that's not rounded in red, we are going to see that only, I think, 3 line items are over 100%, which means they're great. The industrial output for those categories was greater than it was in January 2025. And for everything, we see that we have a decrease of between 34% to as few as a few percent, or just 0.6%. However, overall, the civilian economy, which used to be growing in the sectors of pharmaceutical production and tobacco production by double-digit percentages, is now decreasing when it comes to tobacco production by 23%. And when it comes to pharmaceutical production, it's only growing by 2.9%. Now, the most interesting part is munitions, which you can see have decreased by 6% to 94% of what the output was in 2025. This is the category that includes Russian munition production. And this is significant because it means that the state is no longer able to keep up the Russian armaments industry producing as much as it used to be. Also, if we see the military vehicle production, we have 4.5% increase. But when we look at the percentages for December 2025, the previous month, we have there a decrease of 69%. We also have a similar decrease of 60% for the guidance system, even though they were growing when compared to January 2025. And I have to point out that the month of January 2026 had a lot of holidays, but not enough to lead to a decrease of 60 to 69% of defense spending, defense production output. So I have to point out that this means that overall we're seeing probably a plateau of Russian military production. Also, when it comes to this, we have additional things that are interesting in the other breakdowns of the Russian industrial output. Something that I wanted to point out, you can see here, is that the automotive industry continues to decline. It's down by 21.3%. Other things that are not on this page but were on the subsequent pages is we have cement output is down by 32.3%. Russian cement companies were expecting 40% because of the cold weather stymieing construction. Bricks are down by 49.2%, again, a bad indicator for the Russian construction industry. Bulldozers and tractors are down by 85.5% and 64.4%. And internal combustion engines are down by 28.8%. Again, showing the Russian special vehicles market decreasing significantly and the Russian automotive industry as a whole decreasing. Now, beyond that, this week we didn't have a lot of major stories. The two that I have managed to follow up on is that Mishustin, during his briefing to the Duma, actually mentioned that there was a high-level meeting between him, a part of the Council of Ministers, Putin and Nabiullina, and they discussed at length how to cover the Russian budget deficit. This is becoming a major issue for them, and one of the options that they were talking about, and he was actually mentioning in his brief, was that they were tiptoeing around the issue of printing money. But they're worried about what that might bring on to the economy if they start doing it in regular intervals. But this is the point they've gotten to. To cover the budget deficit, they're considering outright printing money, not even repo deals. The other thing is that the Russian Ministry of Finance wants to change the budget rule. For those who don't know, depending on the price set in the budget, the federal budget, that is, by the Ministry of Finance, they either buy or sell foreign currency and gold from the National Welfare Fund. This is because the current price of Ural is a lot lower than the price set in the budget at $59 per barrel. And they expect that if they follow this price tag, they're going to have to sell for the entirety of the year, emptying out the Russian National Welfare Fund, and they're probably wanting to lower that threshold to something around $45 per barrel, and then they can ensure that for a large portion of the year they're actually going to be buying foreign currency rather than selling. Again, this is their expectation, probably right now boosted by the events of the last few days, that they might be getting higher prices for the Ural than the $41 currently being used to calculate taxes. Then when it comes to banking, we found out that at the end of 2025, in the fourth quarter, the cost to service credit card debt, the full cost, that is with all taxes and fees, rose to 50% or 50.1%. It's up 17.5% over 2025. In 2022, it was at around 34.9%. And in 2023 and 2024, it hovered between 30 and 32.6%. So that's a major increase when it comes to Russian debt and servicing Russian debt by Russians. Also, Russian banks had an increase of their net revenue in January by 38% to 394 billion rubles. Compared to December 2025, the increase was around 120%. So because of these measures, they're still making a lot of money, even though the quality of the loans they're offering is deteriorating. The quality of the loan takers that are taking their loans is deteriorating. We also have news when it comes to Russian commodities and metals. Russia's Magnitogorsk Iron and Steel Works reported a 14.9 billion loss in 2025 versus an almost 80 billion profit in 2024. And in line with all steel production, their revenue decreased by 20.6%. From 768 billion rubles to almost 610 billion rubles. That's a significant decrease by over 2 billion euros, if I'm not mistaken, $2 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And again, it's in line with stories that we've heard that Russian steel consumption is down by 14 to 20%, and prices are also down because of that. When it comes to grain, Russia managed to export between the 1st of February and the 20th of February around 1.66 million tons of wheat, which is 10.6% higher than the same period in 2025. However, growth is slowing down when it comes to exports in February. As a whole, it's expected by the end of February, the exports to be just 1.8 to 1.85 million tons of wheat, which is lower than 2025's 1.9 million tons. When it comes to coal, in January, from the Russian Far East, coal reserves, 2.4 million tons were exported, which is 2.5% lower than in 2025. This is according to the Russian Far East Railways, and overall 2.9 million tons of coal were transported in January from Russia's Far Eastern deposits. It's bad if this is decreasing because these are usually profitable because they have to travel a lot less distance to get to the eastern ports through which Russia usually exports coal, unlike the Kuzbass. And these are actually the more profitable mines in Russia. When it comes to the construction market in Russia, we got the data for demand of newly built housing in January for the cities over 1 million people. These are usually used as a metric to cover the rest of the country because that's where the market is the most dynamic. And demand rose by 66% to 24,100 deals in January 2026. However, this is due to the lumping up of all demand for probably the first few quarters in Russia because of the changes in the way the preferential family mortgage is going to be done from February 1st, 2026. That means that spouses can now take out only one loan per family, one mortgage per family, and also the interest is going to depend on the number of small children the family has. So they're going to be a lot less available, and you can't use two members of the family taking out a mortgage to buy a more expensive house. So they're going to be limited to smaller houses. We also have for old Moscow, that part of Moscow which is known as such, There's a decrease in the amount of housing that's on offer. In terms of volume in square meters, the decrease is 10 to 15%. And in terms of the number of lots available, it's down by 10 to 12%. This is because it's becoming unprofitable to build lower class housing in Moscow because of the high cost of financing currently and the rapidly growing construction costs. When it comes to interesting data points, this week I have a few. So first, the head of Audax that produces Lada stated that the sales of Lada in January and February 2026 were the worst for the last 20 years, since they keep the stats on how the sales are going. And the company still plans to increase sales by 9.3% in 2026, but I have to point out that in January 2026, sales were down by 28.7%. So Lada might be heading for another terrible year in 2026, even with the new laws on the mandatory use of domestically produced taxis being introduced in almost all of Russia except for Siberia and the Russian Far East. We also had news from Murmansk. It's planning to borrow 16 billion rubles from the banks to cover its deficit. And the interesting thing here is that it's going to get it at a rate of, at least it's hoping to get it at a rate of 20.43%. So this is nearly 6% higher than the federal borrowing rate when it comes to debt issued by the Russian Ministry of Finance. And over the 600 days is going to take for them to repay it. It's going to pay 5 billion or more to cover the interest alone. So 1/3 of the loan is going to go to cover the interest. This is the cost of borrowing for Russia's regions that are being forced to carry on the majority of the costs for the sign-up of new soldiers. They're being forced to borrow at basically prices for bankrupt countries. The final bit is that the Russian voluntary supplementary insurance in 2025 rose by up to 15% year over year. And this is mainly due to the fast pace of growth of medical services, which rose by 10 to 15% in 2025. So in Russia, they have a mandatory health insurance that is provided by the state, but you can also have a voluntary supplementary health insurance for private clinics and specific additional treatments. The final part when it comes to Russia's business news this week, inflation and debt. For inflation for the period from the 17th to the 24th of February, it came in at 0.19%. This is usually inflation that's high enough for the Russian central bank to say that they need to raise the interest rates. We'll see what they'll do in almost a month from now. And the inflation for February is currently at 0.51%, and for 2026 as a whole at 2.14%. And I have to point out that there was so far an adjustment of the inflation for January of 0.41%. So in practice, the inflation for 2026, at least the official one, should be around 2.5%, not 2.14. They had two debt auctions this week on Wednesday. The first one managed to raise a bit over 27 billion rubles. And in connection to the lowering of the interest rate, also the interest on the debt was lowered at 14.75%. And the second auction was for 102 billion rubles, and the interest was again 14.75%. And that's it for me for this week.
Thank you, Stanimir. So I have a question for you. Did the Russians change anything in their sign-up bonuses and the reparations for people who lose their family members?
I think we mentioned that last week. The Kuzbas region, Kemerovo, actually lowered the payment for relatives who died from 3 million to 1 million. I think beyond that, they've only been raising the payments for sign-up bonuses. I haven't seen any other, in the local news, any other story of a reduction of the payment for family members or bonuses. I've only seen in Stavropol where they tried to equalize the payment bonus from the district to be the same across the entire region. Beyond that, what they introduced is different. They now have quotas in universities for how many people sign up for the war. And Russian university lecturers and professors and deans are encouraged to use various methods to force students to sign up. They're calling it that they're going to be signing up for the unmanned aerial systems forces, but in practice, it's a generic contract, so you can be sent into the infantry wave immediately after you sign up. And
I have something
yes?
for this, if you don't mind. I had exactly this case recently, where a guy signed up for the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 2nd Combined Arms Army. And then the relatives said, like a few weeks later, he was reassigned to Assault Brigade, and now he's missing. So I have the perfect example for this happening. Yeah.
Yeah, because you sign a generic contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense, you don't get to pick where you serve. You don't get to pick the unit you serve with. You don't get to pick the duration. They're being told that these contracts are for 1 year. They're indefinite contracts until the mobilization decree is over. So, yeah, for those students who sign up, they're probably going to have to expect that they be sent in the infantry if there's not enough infantry. No one's going to put them in the UAV sections even if they wanted to. So yeah, Russia is basically spending its future on its current war. It used to be one of the top 3 highest nations when it comes to the percentage of people who had higher education. And now they, in practice, are going to reduce the amount of open spots for higher education and for students who are in the lower percentage when it comes to results on tests and their studies to join up with the army. So that's the extent of what is happening there. I really haven't seen any decrease other from Kemerovo of the money they spent on family members of Russian soldiers that died in the war.
Yeah, but they're seemingly tuning the recruitment strategy, and I guess that means that they have different needs than before.
Well, they have, how should I put it? Russia for the last 2 years has tried to dissuade people from joining universities because they need more blue-collar workers. And now that there's less of a need for blue-collar workers as demand is dropping down, they're thinking that they can spend these on the army. This is a change in the priority that's been going on for 2 years, but it's been for different reasons. Initially, it was because they thought they didn't want so many lawyers, humanities studies, sociologists, and people who understand how a nation is being run and what the people are thinking. And now it's more because they need more soldiers and they want to force anyone who's dropping out of university to join the army.
Yeah, understood. Thank you for that. And thank you for Geschlitter just, jumping in and breaking down the door and giving the very, very useful info. Welcome, Geschlitter.
Hello. Good evening.
Yeah, thank you, Stanimir. I think now it's time to go to Audax. Welcome to you as well, Audax.
Hey, thank you very much for having me here for a second time.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you could join us again. Things have been happening in, I would say, your area of operations, and we are very interested to hear what kind of developments have been happening around Konstantinivka. I know that the situation there is very, very difficult, so please go ahead.
Great. Let me share my screen.
Yep.
Don't know if you can see anything. Great.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to talk about Ukrainian logistics in general before moving on to the Frontline and changes that happened there recently. In general, the supply of Konstantinivka is organized by 2 main roads. Konstantinivka is basically split into 2 parts. One is east of the river and one side west of the river. And there are 2 main access roads used for supply. And Russian drones have been here very, very actively like they have been about the whole town, making supplies very, very difficult. Entering the town is only possible with armored vehicles. Soft-skinned vehicles or unarmored vehicles like pickups don't even reach Konstantinivka anymore. There have been a few Russian drone units like Rubicon, you're likely all familiar with, but also the 27th Artillery Regiment were actively hitting the Western Axis Road, and the Russians' 70th Motorized Rifle Division, which are operating around Chasiv Yar area, have been very actively hitting the Eastern route. There are a lot of videos showing Ukrainian vehicles being attacked there, and making logistics very, very difficult. So, filter on here, so we can maybe see some data points. Ukrainians are now relying heavily on UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. Maybe I should just remove too many geolocations. Ukrainians heavily rely on UGVs to supply their forces in Konstantinivka. Let me just fix this. Yeah, that looks way better. And using UGVs and supply their forces in Konstantinivka as it's less dangerous than soldiers on foot, and UGVs are easily able to sneak through the town without being seen compared to large military vehicles. One Ukrainian unit has been very active here. That's the 100 Mechanized Brigade. As far as I know, they're the third most active Ukrainian unit of the whole front line using UGVs. This is pretty unusual, as the 100 Mechanized Brigade isn't really common for them to lead statistics, as they are not like an elite unit, but similarly they found their way, the method to successful supply the soldiers in Konstantinivka with UGVs. Very rarely we see footage. We mostly see just Ukrainian UGVs being attacked, but just to have an impression, there's a video by the 100 Mechanized Brigade back here in this area. It's like several kilometers away from the front line. And just to give you an impression of how high the density of Ukrainian UGVs is, there are 3 Ukrainian UGVs approaching an intersection, and they nearly cause a little road accident. This is a quite funny video, as the one UGV loses control and crashes into a fence. But in general, on this serious way, and this shows how high the Ukrainian UGV concentration is, and if the Ukrainians are already operating here with UGVs several kilometers away from the front line, this really gives an impression how high the Russian drone saturation is. There's a second video I'd like to show you too. This is from the same Ukrainian unit, and there we can see often used Russian tactic. Russians used like these waiting FPV drones sitting on the road to ambush Ukrainian vehicles and soldiers. This Ukrainian vehicle is carrying a deceased Ukrainian soldier, but the Russian drone attacks it anyway. You can see several destroyed UGVs on the side of the road, as well as 2 Ukrainian destroyed pickups in the background. Here the Russian drone picks up the UGV and attacks it, and something really interesting happens. The drone misses and it slides through the mud and is broken. So it generally shows a situation of Ukrainians heavily using UGVs. The video was recorded. Let me pull up the map.
And it was
back
a dud
here
as well. That's very lucky in this case.
Yeah. Right. The video was recorded here, also very far away from the front line, but just to show you, to give you a general impression how Russian drones are operating here. In general, the UGVs are able to supply the soldiers, but Russians are trying to prevent that. In recent months, they started striking the bridges in Konstantinivka, likely trying to cut the city in half to make Ukrainian supply more difficult. There have been several videos of Russians attacking bridges. It's very difficult to make a damage assessment. Likely, most of the bridges are damaged, and it's unclear if some of them are still passable with vehicles. On foot, they are in theory, although it's very dangerous to cross them. But this is like a general development we have seen recently. There have been 2 instances I'd like to point out where Ukrainians mined their own bridges with explosive devices. but they didn't secure them well enough, causing Russians to penetrate the nets and blowing up these bridges. This caused a little bit of an outrage, as it's not how it's supposed to be done, especially as one of the bridges here, that's the vehicle of the bridge geolocation. It's from January, it's not visible here. It's like one of the main access roads to the town. It was blown up by Russians and then hit by an airstrike. But luckily, the Ukrainians were able just to drive around the road and the destroyed bridge and supply them and still access Konstantinivka with the vehicles. Based on reports, the Russian attempt to cut off the supplies here wasn't successful by destroying the bridge. So Russians started to airstrike a dam here near Konstantinivka. There have been at least 2 separate occasions of Russian airstrikes. The second occasion we know of was on the 23rd of February. That causes the dam to break, actually. In theory, the dam didn't break, only the dam gates broke, but the Russians destroyed them, and now there was a lot of water rushing out and the dam. Videos published by reconnaissance drones show a lot of water flowing out and rushing down this area towards Konstantinivka. There's another video here showing Konstantinivka right here. Here we can see the main supply road and a very large lake or swamp-like area being created. Based on reports by the Ukrainian analyst team Deep State, the supply has been cut off, and the Ukrainians can't use this road anymore with vehicles. This is a very big issue. As I already mentioned, Russians tried to cut the city in half by destroying the bridges, and the whole western part of Konstantinivka heavily relies on this one singular road.
I have an additional point for this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So you said this now cuts off the western part of Kostiantynivka. The thing is, as we both have seen in the last 2 or 3 months, the Russians have heavily redeployed units from western Konstantinivka, like the ones that tried to penetrate the southern Duchess, or like near Ivanopilia, Alexandra Sholtina, etc. They redeployed those units further west towards Bereztok, Ilinivka, etc. So maybe that's actually part of the strategy to cut the eastern part of the town. So the western part of the town. So they allow the increased efforts from Yablonivka to reach to take the western part of Konstantinivka.
Yeah, that's right. I would have addressed that later, but thank you very much for bringing that up now. This aligns with more Russian pressure being dealt on the western part. It seems like Russians are also focused on this part of Konstantinivka and also the southern part, but especially we have seen a lot of increased pressure since January, but also throughout February in this part of Konstantinivka, and maybe they're trying to force a breakthrough and to cut Ukrainian supplies. As of now, anything holds. Everything holds. I will speak about that later, but this situation is very, very, very critical here. According to Deep State, and Ukrainians are working on different ways to organize supply. In theory, you can drive through these reservoirs. There's some small spaces there. There are no roads. It's unclear if it's like a little bit muddy, the area, if you can even pass through it. I personally don't really know how they want to organize the supply right now. In theory, you could supply soldiers by drones. And drop supplies. I would suspect we will see increased videos of Russians attacking Ukrainian heavy bombers dropping supplies in this area. But it's likely that this wouldn't be enough, because also injured soldiers need to leave and new soldiers need to come in this area, and you can't drop soldiers by drones. So the Ukrainians will need to find another way to reorganize their supply. Just one note, we've only seen videos here of the whole area flooded, likely recorded on the day where the dam got destroyed. We don't know how it looks right now. It seems like the water doesn't just flow off and now the whole area is free of water again, but there might be ways to drain it, or possibly the water level has already lowered in recent days, and maybe the Ukrainians will be able to use the road in the upcoming weeks. But we just really don't know that. Before I want to add two additional things about the dam, just to speak about logistics in general, the situation has gotten worse, definitely, for the Ukrainians. As of now, they are still able to supply their forces, but I read from reports that it's getting more and more difficult to supply soldiers, and the use of UGVs is essential. But in their reports, a lot of videos of seeing lots of destroyed Ukrainian UGVs in Kostiantynivka. This is generally a good sign, as it shows that they are working and they are being attacked instead of soldiers or vehicles that could have been destroyed and are like more valuable targets. But that's something we should keep an eye on, possibly also in the future, as Konstantinivka is their UGVs are used dominantly and maybe more than other parts of the front line. So if we can see other battles in the future of cities, we will likely see a similar development there. Speaking of the dam, there are two things I would to address here. First of all, the broken dam, the flooding, we don't really know what additional damage this might have caused. I'm not aware of any fortifications in this area, like trench systems, but it's likely that a few dugouts have been flooded, but there isn't any data to really say something about that. Notably, there are Ukrainian dragon's teeth placed here in a line, and the water rushed through them. It's concrete; they can't really be washed away, but they could have been damaged during the floods, and repairing them would be very difficult to Russian drones operating here. Maybe we should have an eye on that in the future if the water level lowers, if there are any damages caused to the fortifications. Some of you might also be interested on civilian impact. You can see in the footage that they were very lucky. There's a small valley, so the houses were barely missed by the rushing floods, or the backyards were flooded. But in general, there are still remaining civilians in Konstantinivka, likely also still many who wish to be evacuated from Konstantinivka, and they are cut off too. As of now, there aren't any really reports indicating that, but it's very likely that the remaining civilians and ongoing evacuations also came to a halt. I think we will all have an eye on that, and you will see reports if there are more detailed information. But this is another implication that there are still civilians in here, and Ukrainians also find out new ways to get them out. I think that's about it about Ukrainian logistics. Before moving on to the front line and the development, Erlend, do you have any questions, or can I go
on? When it comes to the UGVs, do you have any perception if it has completely replaced logistics by normal vehicles, manned vehicles, or do you have any percentage or any guesses or estimates about that? Because I haven't seen any or there's a long time since I've seen videos of vehicles driving in Konstantinivka.
Yeah, the main issue here is the data. The Ukrainians don't publish footage of their UGVs or their supplies operating. It's very rare to see these videos of UGVs. They are like these two, like three more videos of Ukrainian UGV point of view videos, but there isn't just any really data. And Russian footage only shows attacks on them that are successful. So we don't really know how many Russian attacks that are successful. We don't know how many Ukrainian supplies are still being done, and because the Ukrainians just don't publish that. And definitely a few videos of Ukrainian vehicles driving around here, also in Ilinivka, that caused troop rotations. I mentioned one here, I think, where Ukrainian, did I mention it? I don't think I mentioned it, where the 100 Mechanized Brigade performed a troop rotation here. So in theory, it's still being done, but we see it very rarely, and the data isn't good enough to make any estimations.
Troop rotations have still to be done by troops, obviously.
Yeah. But on the topic of trying, or at least replacing a lot of logistics with UGVs, I just wanted to highlight that that the factor that is very important for Ukraine and kind of been the policy that they've been promoting as well is that if you can replace a manned mission with something autonomous, then it is going to be worth it, even if you lose an expensive UGV, because obviously we've seen a lot of logistic or supply vehicles being hit with drones, and that's been one of the things the Russians have been trying to do as much as possible. Wouldn't say that every vehicle hit is definitely a casualty, but a big portion of them is. And if you can spare human lives, then that's really, really good.
Yes. And I think the main indicator, maybe to answer your question a bit more, is that Russians blew up the dam. If Russian FPV drones would be enough to stop all vehicles, it wouldn't have been necessary to blow up the dam. But they blew up the dam. That means that Ukrainians were still able to pass through, and was still worth it from a Russian perspective to blow it up. So maybe that's
because it will hinder them their own advances in the future.
I
mean, it's a risk for them as well not to blow it up, no?
There's a valley here, and we don't really know if the water will drain or not. We haven't seen any recent footage, only footage from the day it got blown up. Maybe the Russians, on their current pace, it will take them maybe 2 years if they don't speed up to reach to this point. And in 2 years, or maybe 1 year, the situation here could have changed. So only if the Russians would reach to this point in the next few weeks or months, which is highly, highly unlikely, then it would be a problem for the Russians. But I don't really think that this dam in particular will create problems for the Russians. Maybe it does, and I'm wrong.
Do you know if there are other crossing points of the river that are still possible to use?
This bridge is likely intact, but you obviously can't use it because there's heavy fighting going on. We haven't seen any videos of Ukrainian vehicles operating this far south. There are a few smaller roads that have been hit, but I don't really can give a damage assessment. This bridge, for example, seems to be largely destroyed, but it's unclear if you can still pass through it like small vehicles. There's just a lack of footage, because obviously the Ukrainians are not going to publish the footage of the bridge being destroyed, and the Russians also only publish bridges if they're completely destroyed. And they like this bridge, I think this is completely destroyed. But they haven't really published footage of the other bridges where we can definitely say it's destroyed. And in the past, Ukrainians have also put like pontoon bridges, like here, for example, the bridge got destroyed, and Ukrainians just filled it up with dirt and made a bridge there. I also don't have any data if there are any like other pontoon bridges being built here to make supply from west to east and east to west possible.
Yeah, I would assume that Ukraine would try to get more crossing points viable. Obviously, the flooding will make it a lot more difficult, but it may be necessary, even if it's very risky and difficult, because logistics is key to survival, and there are troops in those areas, right? That's one thing I wanted to ask about, but maybe we can go more to the next part of your update that has to do with the front and the positions, right?
Yes, there's a lot of going on. I think we can move to that now. We just put up the most recent geolocations. I will move west to east from village to village and explain the general information we have here. First of all, Yablonivka and Stepanivka. Ukrainians are highly likely still holding on a few houses here. We've seen a lot of footage in January of Ukrainian presence there. Maybe I can pull it also up. You can see it visually. Here, we've seen continued Ukrainian presence in January, and also in these forests. This denies or contradicts Russians' claims of having this captured for half a year now, as Ukrainians are still present. A lot of Russian assaults are happening in these tree lines and pushing north. Videos indicate that a lot of Russian soldiers died here, but Russians likely have been partially successful by reaching the southern outskirts of Stepanivka. And there was a video published a long time ago showing a basement hit in Stepanivka by a Ukrainian FPV drone. It's unlikely that Russians really have control over southern Stepanivka, but the southern part is now contested. This is really important for the Ukrainians to hold these villages, as more pressure on the flanks of Konstantinivka would really worsen the situation, as we've seen in Toretsk in the past, that the Ukrainians were able to stop the Russians at certain points. But when the Russians started to assault in the flanks, the situation in the center obviously got worse. If I remember correctly, in the last, in early January, when I was here the first time, I said we should keep an eye on the reservoir area, especially around west of the reservoir towards Ilinivka and Bereztok. Sadly, I was right. In January and February, a large scale of Ukrainian infiltrations, Russian infiltrations have taken place. Based on reports, Russians likely infiltrated through the whole town of Ilinivka and tried to gain control of it. It seems like they weren't successful. We haven't seen any footage of Russians being in this area, although they likely have been. But we've seen a lot of Russians of Ukrainians being shelled there. Especially recently, there was footage of Ukrainians being shelled in the south, indicating that Ukrainians still remain in this village. And likely there are still much more Ukrainians than Russians in there. Although, based on the video published by Deep State, it cannot be verified with open source information, with satellite imagery, but it's highly likely that they are correct when they claim they attacked Russians there. The Ukrainians likely have gotten, the situation is now less worse than it was a few weeks ago, but there's still Russian infiltrations taking place here. A similar development can be seen near Bereztok. In early January, I got hands on some non-public footage showing Ukrainian drone attacks at Russians directly south of Bereztok. Since then, Russians have infiltrated into Bereztok itself. The same situation here again, with no footage of Russians here, although it's highly likely, based also on Ukrainian reports, that Russians are operating in the whole town. But the Russians don't publish any footage from Bereztok themselves. So there's a large lack of footage and data in Bereztok. It's likely contested, but we don't really know if which part of the village are held by Russians or Ukrainians. There was footage by the Russians 10th Tank Regiment waving flags in Bereztok, but it was cut and published in a way so it wasn't possible to be geolocated. It's unclear if these were staged and recorded elsewhere, or if these were real. But it's a little bit suspicious that Russians showed soldiers waving flags, but publishing it and cutting it in a way so it wasn't possible to geolocate it. In the last few weeks, Russians have infiltrated further north, and there has been at least one incident of Russians penetrating deep into Konstantinivka. It's a very worrying situation. In the past weeks, Russians have been heavily hitting this area with drones and shelling. There's still a lot of backlog footage I need to work through, especially this southern half. In early February, Russians then entered the town. Russians have been here in the south, and then they moved up along the side of the town up to, I don't know why this is mapped here, but Russians reached this building. It's unclear if all Russian infiltrators in this area have been cleared. Pro-Russian sources claim full control of Konstantinivka here. That is bullshit. That's highly, highly unlikely. As today, again, I got seen a video I need to publish on Twitter of Ukrainians operating in this area. This area is likely dominantly Ukrainians are still operating there. There might still be a few Russians left, but the situation is still critical for the Ukrainians to prevent deep infiltrations, like we've seen in Pokrovsk months ago in Milnograd, where the Ukrainians lost control over the line of contact, and there were a lot of small scattered positions throughout the whole town. The Ukrainians definitely want to prevent that. As of now, they're working very, very hard in this area. We will have to wait in the following weeks if the Ukrainians will be successful to stop the Russians here, or if the situation may get worse. And in this this context, of course, the supply cut might be an important factor. Like Geschüttert already mentioned, this Russians advances and infiltrations online with units moving from east of the reservoir to west of the reservoir, including the 1,456 motorized rifle regiment, parts of the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade, as well as the 7th Military Base, and several Russian units who are assaulting in Pleshivka and Ivanopilia area are also hitting
another major one? Another major one is the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment.
Yeah, but I'm not really sure about that, because in the past they have been likely assaulting this whole area from the east, infiltrating more this way, and I'm not really sure if also soldiers infiltrated that way. The axis more likely seems to be here, but there isn't really footage to prove that. But they have been working here too, but I think they are more likely coming from the east, but perhaps some elements also west of the reservoir. But they are a unit working very heavily here, and the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment published tons of footage hitting Ukrainian positions here during the Russian infiltrations. They haven't still geolocated all their footage. And moving on to an area that has gotten significantly worse recently, that's the area north of the reservoir. For the last weeks, Russians have been operating here in the forests, but now footage appeared of Russians also operating or reaching these tree lines and entering dugouts or positions here. Sadly, not all of them are mapped here, but Russians have been here, and here are also a lot of trench systems the Russians reached. As of now, Ukrainians likely still hold on. We have seen footage of Ukrainians operating here west of Pleshivka and in Ivanopilia, but the presence of Ukrainians on the geolocations I got of Ukrainians operating in this area have been declining recently. And likely there's the Ukrainians holding out to fortifications and positions at Ivanopilia, Pleshivka, and also yet the reservoir, but likely they are getting less and less as Russians have been pushing here. Most worrying development is Russians reaching this area. Here's some kind of educational buildings or like a university as far as I know. Russians are heavily assaulting here based on reports. They are after Russian shelled this area first in recent weeks. There have been 2 occasions where we can visually observe Russians. They once entered a building here, and a Russian soldier here surrendered to a Ukrainian drone before the Russian soldier got killed by a Russian drone. Something we have seen increasingly also in other parts of the front line. This is very important as these are heavily fortified buildings, which are playing a key role in Ukrainian defenses here in the southern part of Konstantinivka. The following weeks will tell how the situation develops, but this is a very big problem if Russians could gain control over these buildings, as these would also cut off remaining Ukrainians down here. But at the same time, Russians are operating here. We still got footage of Ukrainians here in this part of Ivanopilia, as well as here in the north, indicating that there's also still Ukrainian remnants here who also threaten to be cut off if Russians gain control over these key positions. A similar development can be observed here in Konstantinivka. We recently again had footage of Ukrainian position hit here in the Dacha area, as well as Russian shelling in this area. For example, here by the I think it's a 72nd Motorized Rifle Brigade, but also from Russian Bars unit shelling here, indicated Ukrainians remain in this part of Konstantinivka, out in the Dacha area, but Russian infiltrations in this area are threatening to cut Ukrainians off. If they manage to kick out remaining Ukrainians here. This is like the same tactic from the Ukrainians we have seen for weeks now, to hold on to positions as long as possible before retreating. Interesting development here is the 19th Army Corps on the Ukrainian side published videos in January and February of Ukrainian soldiers from the 28th Mechanized Brigade, 44th Mechanized Brigade, as well as the 36th Marine Brigade, showing Ukrainian soldiers walking through the city center and these buildings and claiming full control of Konstantinivka. We also saw a video of a Russian soldier walking here and claiming full Russian control. When it comes to these videos, they were a bit surprising, as there's very high drone, a lot of drones operating here, a lot of reconnaissance being done, that soldiers are able to walk through this area for several minutes, seemingly, without being attacked by drones. In theory, these Ukrainian videos by the 19th Army Corps could have been pre-recorded and not be recent, although there isn't any proof to say that. And it's a bit unclear if they are all recent or some of them have been recorded in the past few weeks or months. They do align with the weather at the time when they were published, but it's not possible to prove them based on other footage that they are definitely recent or not recent. We don't know that. But it shows how informational warfare is being done by both sides walking through this area and recording videos claiming full control. And last but not least, I would like to talk about this area.
There was one funny video recently showing up of someone claiming control and then getting captured.
Oh yeah, I didn't mention that. The Russian soldier who recorded this video, interestingly, got captured after that, and before sending the video to his brigade, so that the Ukrainian soldiers making fun of the Russian soldier by publishing his videos and then cutting to him sitting in a basement and being interrogated by Ukrainian forces. But it generally shows that Russian infiltrations reached there, but likely haven't gained control. There have been a few incidents of Russian infiltrations, also penetrating deeper into Konstantinivka in this area and also here, but this seems to be like singular incidents of small-scale infiltrations that likely don't really lead to Russians gaining control about positions here or kicking out Ukrainians from this area. Although pro-Russian propagandists or map creators claim full control here with Ukrainians in this area too, it's unlikely that these deep Russian infiltrations really caused Russian advances. Now move on to this situation here. In Kostiantynivka and Tochnyi, we haven't seen Ukrainian presence for a longer time, as there's also the Russian units here don't really like to publish much footage. Likely there's still Ukrainian remnants here, as the Ukrainian and deep state are usually really well informed when it comes to remaining Ukrainian presence in these towns. But we see Russian infiltrations reaching further and further. Ukrainians likely still hold on to these dacha areas, but Russian infiltrations can also be seen in there and north of it. Although in these cases, I can pull them up, it's likely that the Russian soldiers there, like if there was a Russian soldier and another Russian soldier got attacked here, they all likely got killed and didn't survive their infiltration attempts. And Ukraine still holds on to these dachas, although we can see the same Russian tactic of walking around Ukrainian positions to capture positions behind them to put them more under pressure. And this is could be very dangerous for remaining Ukrainian forces here, as there's a wide open area and retreating from Kostiantynivka is very, very dangerous as of now. And this is an area we should keep an eye on. If Russians, today I do look at the video of Russian presence here on this tree line, putting very, very big pressure on remaining Ukrainians south here, and also created the possibility of future Russian infiltrations also reaching this part of Konstantinivka. There was one video in the past of a Russian soldier. That was a Russian soldier being killed by a Russian drone after an infiltration attempt, and a Russian soldier surrendering to Ukrainian forces here in this village, indicating that there are Russian infiltrations going on in this area. But as of now, they seemingly haven't been successful. This is a general problematic situation. This also intensifies pressure on remaining Ukrainians. In Chasiv, they have captured a Russian soldier as a prisoner of war recently in this part of the town. Yeah, that's about this area. I think I've now addressed all the main towns and main developments. Erlend, do you have any questions?
Well, yeah, I wondered if you have any opinions about what is the main effector on the battlefield now? Is it drones? When we see movement of either Russians or Ukrainians, is it almost exclusively are they almost exclusively being attacked by drones, or do we see any soldier to soldier combat as well?
I've read a report by Ukrainian commander, he's commander of the 28th Mechanized Brigade, or only one of the battalions, who stated that they prefer attacking Russian infiltrations or assaults with drones instead of infantry, as Ukraine doesn't have enough infantry in Konstantinivka due to shortages to be able to fight combat soldier to soldier assaults, as there are high risk of Ukrainian soldiers getting wounded or killed, and it's much safer to attack them with FPV drones. And in general, the main development we can see here is large scale of Russian soldiers infiltrating. Russians are losing a lot of soldiers in these attempts, but some of them are successful because Ukrainian drones aren't able to stop them all. And then when they gain positions deep into Konstantinivka, and then we likely see Ukrainian infantry working on them. But Russians operating this yellow area, we rarely see Ukrainian close-to-close combat. Only when there are deep Russian infiltrations, there's more likely that Ukrainian infantry is engaging because there's a high urgency of clearing like this basement or this Russian position. But it's more often we see like drones engaging, and we rarely see infantry close combat footage. Yeah. So the main issue is basically Russians having more infantry than the Ukrainians, and Russian commanders are willing to lose a lot of infantry in these combat situations, and the Ukrainians don't want to do that, so the Ukrainians mainly rely on drones.
Yep. And then another question: what do you see as the main struggle for the Ukrainians here? Is it Russian drones, Russian artillery, or Russian airstrikes?
It's a good question. It's really difficult to see what's the biggest problem. I would say Russian. So first of all, like the manpower difference, as there are a lot of more Russian soldiers than Ukrainian soldiers in these assaults, making it difficult for the Ukrainians to defend their positions due to constant Russian assaults, and it's like the one of the biggest factors. And the other one is in general logistics, with also Russian drones and fiber optic FPV drones. We've seen footage of Ukrainians already engaging to Russian drones here and being attacked, as Ukrainian infantry movement is heavily restricted due to Russian drones. So the two main points I would say are Russian manpower advantages in this area, and the logistics situation, especially with Russian drones. And artillery, it's very difficult to get reliable data on that, as there are some Russian units that publish artillery footage frequently, some don't, and it's difficult to get data. And if Ukrainians strike Russian artillery pieces back here, it's difficult to geolocate them. So I don't have any reliable data on that, but artillery obviously is nice. So, but it's difficult to say how big of a deal they are.
I mean,
Understood.
to look at it from a more structural perspective, I think this war is moving, especially from the Ukrainian side, quickly towards more robotization. I mean, as quickly as they can. I mean, because they have way less infantry available, and I mean, we not only now have the UGVs doing logistics, we also actually have strike UGV units being formed. So UGVs that perform combat missions in form of, yeah. I mean, we have seen some videos, and I think we will see those videos more and more, where UGVs engage Russian soldiers. And I mean, to also the Ukrainians have now widely adopted UGV units in basically most of their brigades. Most brigades get one UGV company, and each battalion underneath get one UGV platoon. That's actually exactly the same structure what we have seen with the UAVs when they were introduced in they were widely introduced in 2023. I'll say in a structural sense, and we see a similar development now with the UGVs, and it just makes a lot of sense from the Ukrainian perspective.
Yeah, we will definitely see more footage in the future. We currently are discovering each day new social media accounts of Ukrainian UGV units, and they need to form the unit and create their social media accounts before we see them publishing footage there. But we will see an increased amount there. Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that that Ukraine won't deploy troops on the ground. What I suspect is that they're going to try to limit any exposure of troops, because that is basically the problem in this drone-saturated frontline scenario. It's not necessarily the presence of infantry. It's when you go out, you are immediately a target. And if you can limit the time that you're exposed to an absolute minimum by basically using UGVs to patrol, to supply, and also obviously evacuate, then you will reduce the footprint that the Russians are able to see quite substantially. So I think that's where we're going, not necessarily going towards front line without any troops.
No, but it's just an increasing robotization. There will always be troops on the front line, but just fewer than before.
Yeah, or I'm not sure if there will be fewer.
They're less endangered than before. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're gonna necessarily drop in numbers. Maybe to some degree.
You can't really drop much further in some areas.
Yeah, but actually, I think maybe this will enable Ukraine to have more troops available in certain areas, because
of course, because they will lose less.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think we're far away from robots basically holding front lines still, and it likely won't happen in my opinion, but we'll see. But I thank you so much, Audax, for highlighting all these cases of UGVs being used and how drones are basically controlling the areas, because it's a very important perspective for people to understand the dynamics of the front lines now.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I will keep a close eye on the whole Konstantinivka situation in the following weeks, and especially UGVs, of course. I hope we will see more footage showing them being used, because it's a really interesting development there. I agree with Geschüttert.
And then, side topic. Since you were last here, you and also officially Deep State proclaimed that Toretsk has officially been fully captured by the Russians. And obviously you are the Toretsk guy. So would you want to make a quick note about that?
Right. Thanks for mentioning that. I totally forgot about it. I have it already I think on February 2nd, also a month ago, claims that Toretsk is under full Russian control, and Russian claim to capture Toretsk in early 2025. But we've seen Ukrainian holding on until the outskirts in summer and autumn 2025, months later, after Russian claim to have captured it. Oh God, time to stop. Captured it. I personally think that we have collected a lot of data on Toretsk itself. I think when we, I hope this doesn't crash the website. If you just pull up 2025, 1st of January till now, maybe we can see. Oh God, I hope the website doesn't.
Next screen.
Yeah, this is only since the 1st of January 2025, and not the footage in 2024. Shows like a lot of data we have here. and you can do a lot of fun stuff with data. I personally will try to look through archive footage and fill up remaining events that haven't been mapped. For example, there have been Ukrainian tank assaults here that aren't probably known yet, but it's got hands-on footage, and the Russian vehicle assault here in 2024. This was very, very interesting. It also isn't known as far as I know. And with that, I think I would be interesting with cooperation with Tochnyi to get something with this data and maybe write a few articles outlining phases of the battle and maybe also analyzing tactics we have seen. For example, in this area, there are a lot of instances of Ukrainian infantry assaulting Russian positions in early 2025. And can I pull it up? No, okay, the website doesn't let me.
There are too many points on the map. That's why.
Too many points. Typical issue here. I think there is. You might see some publications in the future where we do something with the data. Currently, it's just sitting here, but it's not really practical, as you might can see.
Yeah, the story of the Battle of Toretsk is, in my opinion, going to be one of the most important stories about urban combat in modern warfare history, because it's a unique battle in the sense of how it actually happened, right?
And one thing I'd like to mention here is we've seen a lot of tactics here, like Ukrainian blowing up buildings. For example, a lot of buildings here have been destroyed because Ukrainians didn't want to use close combat from infantry to infantry due to high casualties that would inflict to the Ukrainian soldiers assaulting Russian positions. And also here in this area, they blew up a lot of houses there with Russian presence. And this is a really unique tactic we have seen here. I'd like to write something about that and try to figure it out more. And interestingly, we don't see this tactic anymore due to Russian drone activity in Konstantinivka, because this is very unique stuff that's happened in Toretsk, and battles and tactics being used that still will have an effect on how the Battle of Konstantinivka will go. But as the situation on the front line and technologies have changed, Toretsk is really, really unique, as we see a lot of the initial developments of certain tactics being used and technologies.
By the way, apparently, if you turn off tooltips, this problem with the points not loading or the events not loading is going to be fixed. Okay. We have a question for you from Mitch. So if you're fine moving back to the front lines a little bit, are you seeing indications of Russians having communications issues?
We've seen, we've read reports of Russians having communication issues. When it comes to Konstantinivka, I haven't seen any reports directly saying Russians are having a communications issue in a specific area here, although they likely did. And also haven't seen any Ukrainian maybe counter attacks or slowed down Russian advances, where I can definitely say this is due to Russians having communications issues. They likely have, but there haven't been a big Ukrainians will likely not able to really exploit that based on the data we have. So I sadly can't really give an answer here.
Someone whispered that Geschlittert has to leave, so just want to say thank you for joining us, Geschlittert.
Thanks for having me, and wish you all a very nice stream, and see you soon.
Hope to see you again soon, man.
Bye-bye.
Another question from Belitzling. Wonder who that is. Will the Russians have an easier time to advance in the town once the cold is over?
This is really, really interesting point. In general, I read reports about complaints about the fog we've seen recently in winter. Due to the fog, infantry it was easier for infantry to move in Konstantinivka. It was easier for the Ukrainians to move south, but also easier for the Russians to do infiltrations. With the fog now clearing up and also the weather, and there is no fog, so infantry activity can easily be spotted. But without the muddy situation here and soldiers being dangerous of getting stuck or vehicles moving, it's easier for them to move. So it's really, really difficult what will overweigh here. In general, I don't really think that the implication of weather will be that big. I think other implications will be more important. For example, the supply situation. And in general, if the Ukrainians have been able to fix the supply, I suspect we will see Russians trying to exploit that. We've seen reports of Russia increasing their activity recently in this area, also due to them blocking the supply. And if the Ukrainians are not going to be able to fix that, then I think we will see Russian advances in this area. But if everything goes to the Ukrainian plan, then advances in Konstantinivka will be very, very slow, and there will be a long battle. And that's what the Russians don't want. They want a situation like in Pokrovsk we've seen. I think Kabilic is very, very, very familiar with that, where Russians were able to infiltrate deep into the town and make a lot of scattered positions. So there wasn't a clear line of contact, and the Ukrainians lost control over the battle. These are like the goal of the Russians, and it really depends on if the Ukrainians will be successful with the supply and stopping the Russians from doing whatever they want in the town. But I have no idea how the situation will develop. Everything is possible, but I personally think the supply will be the main factor here in the following weeks.
Question I got in my head is: do you expect the Ukrainians to attempt any counterattacks to push Russians further back?
If I would be a commander on the Ukrainian side, the first thing I would do is try to make sure that all the troops are supplied well enough before I would do counterattacks, because it would be an interesting idea to do counterattacks without having secured supply. Ukrainians have been making surprising decisions in the past in this area. But personally, if the Ukrainians are not being able to secure the supply, I don't think we will see any significant counterattacks. If they can secure the supply and they get control over, and they can do whatever they want, basically, then we will see small scale counterattacks, likely. But they will be only very limited due to vehicles can't really move here due to Russian drone activity. But it's likely that we might see Ukrainians retaking a few streets, like we've seen in Toretsk in the battle there too. But I think it's more difficult to do large advances for the Ukrainians, but also for the Russians due to drones in this area. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see Ukrainian counterattacks. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I think it depends on the supply, because without supply, doing counterattacks will be very, very might not be a good idea.
Thank you. Another question. Gick says, if you could choose, would you prefer keep studying Toretsk, talk to soldiers, get their stories, or continue to tracking assaults on Konstantinivka?
The main issue is I'm already so deep into Konstantinivka research. I don't really want to abandon that, because I have a lot of data and contact to soldiers and social media to get hands on very, very cool footage. And I think, especially, it doesn't. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think I've been really efficiently geolocating Konstantinivka and the whole area, to me being very familiar with this area. So it would be very, very helpful if I stay to map this area. I think I will try to. I haven't really been able to do that. I wanted to do that already a month ago, to geolocate less and less Russian footage and focus mainly on the Ukrainian footage, to have some spare time in general, also my private life, but also to do something with the data. I think in the future I would like to talk to soldiers who are willing to talk, and maybe I give some additional insights, or I also prove that the data we collected and the results we have are actually right. So this is something on the long term that I would like to do. And if hopefully the war will be over in good times for the Ukraine in the future, and there's like no more footage being posted, or no changes changes happening anymore, I think then on the very long term, mapping all of the events that happen in Toretsk will be something I would like to do. Also speak to soldiers, because then there will likely be less operational security and more people willing to speak. But also not about only with soldiers, also with like civilians who have stayed in Toretsk for a long time, and other people being involved there. I think this would be very interesting, as Toretsk seems to be one of the best mapped battles we have, although I think only a fraction of the footage here is geolocated. There's, I think, a lot of things you can work with, and just having the data and not doing anything with it would be a bit sad, because people, I think, are interested in what we're doing here.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to Geek for the good question. I guess the answer is that we need to replicate you.
Yeah, I want to duplicate me into more Audexes. So one Audax can have like free time. One is only working on archive Toretsk stuff, and there are 4 parts. One is doing Konstantinivka, or one is helping Geschlittert with finding new units on Instagram, and doing all of battle stuff. I need more copies of myself. And Andrew wants an additional copy of me to break down videos, I think.
Yeah,
That's it will be a bit difficult.
there's another question from Geek. He asks, from your own impression, which units perform the best in the defense of Toretsk?
For a very long time, I was surprised by the 28 Mechanized Brigade holding on the canal line, especially this area here, for like 3 years or 2 years, without losing any ground. Then the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade appeared from the Russian, and there was a very large pressure. And the 28 Mechanized Brigade lost ground relatively quickly over the course of a few weeks and months. So it really depends on that. 93rd Mechanized Brigade was there too. There's really good units, but if they are just more Russians than Ukrainians, even the best units can't really defend. Same was here with Azov. They were defending really well, but at some point there were just so many Russians, and also they lost grounds. I think saying that 93rd and 28th Mechanized Brigades were defending here really well is true, although it's of course a bit weird to see them losing ground, although they have like defended well. Other units in this area, it's more difficult to have statements about them, if not the whole unit was deployed there, and only maybe some battalions. I think the police units were like had a very interesting fighting with vehicles and doing assaults. I was really impressed by that. They played a key role in blowing up buildings and doing like a lot of close combat footage they published. But when it comes to police units, it's also really difficult to narrow down which battalion and which police unit actually did the assault, because I might not publish it on a higher level. Yeah, I think I would go with 28 Mechanized Brigade, and haven't reached any weird statements about their commanders, like with 100 Mechanized Brigade, where there have been some debates if their commanders' decisions were always the right, to put it this way. But I think 28 Mechanized Brigade is doing a relatively good job, and I think you also can see it in official statistics that 28th Mechanized Brigade they know what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we have reached more or less a conclusion of your segment, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for the work you're doing, and also the update that we got today. And I hope we get to see more of your work both on the Tochnyi stream and maybe some more long form work in the time coming. I know that's a long-term project, and I hope to see some results from that.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I hope can be here in the future too, if more events happen to talk about, and I'm pretty sure you will see some publications or other analysis of the data and the archive stuff we got in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, and also you're welcome to come back at any time. I know that this is probably going to be an area of interest in the time coming. Seems like the Russians are forcing that to be the case.
Yeah.
Well, you're free to obviously stick around. I think we're going to move to sum it up a little bit, and maybe some final thoughts about other situations that have developed around in the world. I'm not sure if Colby is around, but I hope so.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Yeah, I saw that you mentioned on X, Twitter, that we might talk a little bit about some other world events that went down during the weekend, and how that may have or will affect both the war in Ukraine and maybe some other longer term strategic relations towards Russia and obviously the Republic of Iran. Do you have any special thoughts in mind of how this will affect maybe in immediate short to medium term Ukraine, and or any other thoughts about this?
Yeah, look, I mean, the situation in Iran is obviously still rapidly unfolding, so a little bit early to make too many conclusions about what's going to happen there, let alone the greater implications. But it's obvious that these are connected. The whole world is interconnected, and we've been saying this for the past 4 years, that obviously Russia is getting a huge amount of support from other countries, China, North Korea, Iran, and others. So there is a connection here. And so there's going to be implications for Iran. I would say probably positive ones, but again, it's still early. But if the Iranian regime falls, then that's one fewer ally that Putin has to count on, and that's good news for Ukraine. So I don't have any grand prediction right now. I imagine that there might be some questions from the audience, and at the very least, I thought we should mention it since it's the massive developing news story, and it's an opportunity to emphasize to people, not necessarily our audience, but there are lots of people who maybe still don't understand this connection, and it just needs to be emphasized that they are connected. And if you're concerned about what's happening in Iran, you should also be concerned with what's happening in Ukraine, because the two are interconnected.
I just saw some people asking questions out there if this may have some effects when it comes to the Russian supply of long-range attack drones. And I guess that's not necessarily the case. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, obviously Russia is producing their own licensed copy of Shahed 136 and has been for some time. I don't know how many, if any, Iran has continued to supply them as of late. Probably a better question for the guys who are tracking the battlefield updates, whether they, to what extent they are seeing Iranian weapons turn up on the front line. it seems less common than it was in the past, perhaps from my perspective, but maybe I'm missing something there. So I wouldn't say that necessarily, although we know that Iran has supplied Russia with a lot of those drones in the past. They've supplied them with hundreds of missiles as well. So there's an opportunity for that cooperation to be eliminated going forward. Whereas if the Iranian regime just continued to exist, then this would continue to pose a problem in the long term. So
yeah, there was obviously a prospect, at least at some point, of Iran supplying ballistic missiles to Russia, and I guess that's pretty much off the table for the.
well, they did. I mean, the reports are that they did, that they've been held in reserve, as I understand it. But there was a lot of reporting that there were transfers that were made.
Okay, but they've never been used, as far as we know.
If they were, it was very sparingly, as I understand it.
Understood. And one question I have when it comes to maybe short to medium term effects for Ukraine that is might not necessarily so fortunate is the supply of interceptors for Patriot. Is that the massive expenditure of interceptors that we've seen in the Middle East being employed the last 48 hours, is that going to have an effect on the possibilities of buying interceptors from the US?
Well, the supply was already very hand to mouth to begin with. So I would say in the long term, this is a very good thing, because the problem was that Russia and China have been essentially using the threat that Iran's ballistic missile program poses as it's just been draining America's attention and their inventory, because so long as this threat exists, the United States has to allocate a lot of air defense resources to Central Command. And so if the threat is now removed, then you no longer have those assets being tied down in perpetuity. So while, yes, there's more interceptors that have been sent to CENTCOM in the short term, in the long term, there's not going to be a need to have all those assets and all that ammunition deployed there, because the missile threat will either be gone or severely degraded, depending again on how things unfold. And it's still very early in Iran, so we don't really know. But in the long term, this is very good, and this is why I wrote about this. Why, from a missile defense perspective, eliminating the threat now is the wisest course of action, because the alternative is that the United States is still fighting a multi-front war, so to speak, with huge amounts of assets tied down in Central Command, and then they are unable to respond to other crises, whether it be Ukraine or building up inventories in Indo-Pacific Command to face China. So in the long run, this is a very, very positive development, I would say. And again, like, I will continue to beat this dead horse, because it's not really dead, I guess, because people still don't get it as far as the policymakers are concerned. They just don't understand. And hopefully, again, this Iran situation will finally get them to comprehend the concept of theater missile defense, is that it does not exist to provide some sort of impenetrable shield in perpetuity. It exists to buy time so that you can engage in your own counterforce attacks. And that's the missing link here that's still absent 4 years into the war, is that Ukraine does not have the ability to retaliate the way they need to against Russia. And so we need to get them more assets so that they're not just continuing to only play defense, but actually striking back at Russian forces and Russian industry. And hopefully policymakers are finally starting to get that, witnessing now theater missile defense again on a very large scale happening in the Middle East, accompanied with these counterforce strikes against the Iranian regime. That's what we need to see happen to Russia as well. These exist symbiotically together. So that's the hope, is that people will start to realize this now, because again, whether it's the United States or Europe, there's just not an appreciation of the importance of equipping Ukraine with long-range precision fires to take the fight back to Russia.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. And I hope that you're right that this will demonstrate that very fact, and we'll have some medium term maybe changes for Ukraine. I know that Stanimir has a point as well, because this might affect Russia's ability to gain some revenue, right?
Yes, because a lot of people are now focusing on the immediate jump in the price of oil, although a lot of it has already been pre-calculated in the previous days. I have to add that one of the development, if the Houthis really close down the Red Sea again or impose hazards to it, to traffic through there. Currently, Russia moves about a third of its oil from the Baltic. Because of the way Russian pipelines are done, you can't actually move that to go to another port, like let's say Novorossiysk. You just can't ship that much volume. So the Baltic remains a major export hub. So right now, when it comes to shipments to China, which has become the major buyer after India reduced its purchases, it costs $16.2 to ship from the Baltic to China using tankers. Now, $1 of that is the additional cost because the Baltic is currently frozen and you have to get an icebreaker ship or have an ice class vessel. But the rest is pure costs because of the sanctions, because of the restrictions, because of the possible seizure of tankers. On top of that, for India, again, we have to remove $1, but it's around $13.4 when it comes to oil transportation costs. If they have to shift travel to go around Africa to avoid a possible hit on the tanker, because we haven't seen Houthis being actually good at recognizing which ships actually carry Russian cargo. They've actually hit them. So if they have to go around the round trip around Africa, that might eat up a lot of their gained revenue from the further price increases of oil due to the shutdown of the Hormuz Strait or the reluctance of tankers to go for the Hormuz Strait, despite some claims by Iran that it will only target American ships. And Russian costs might jump significantly additionally because they've been using the Red Sea as a ship-to-ship transfer point because the way things are going, they're looking for buyers in China for maybe a week, maybe more. There's a big buildup of Russian oil at sea, so they're having trouble finding actual buyers. So what they do is they ship with smaller tankers that can go for the Suez to the Red Sea, and then there they transfer the oil to bigger tankers, which can then sit as sort of a semi-storage and wait for a Chinese buy offer to come and then ship the oil to that Chinese refinery. So in these two ways, with just the rising costs for deliveries and the requirement to hire tankers for longer and use them to transfer oil in the midpoint of the travel, we can see Russian gains from the increase of oil just from the operation be eaten up by logistics costs almost completely. And I have to point out that currently, when it comes to prices for the Ural oil, the average price when you have 78% from Urals and 22% from ESPO, which isn't affected because it's on the other side of Russia, the price that Russia actually has in the budget when it taxes oil is $41 to $42 per barrel. They're currently incurring an over $30 discount when it comes to Brent prices, and they don't have that much room to accommodate additional logistics cost and logistic cost increases. But we have to see that in the going weeks if actually the Red Sea becomes hazardous and if they have to switch the point for ship transfers and if they have to rent tankers for longer to go around the Africa road. But right now it's not a clear cut as Russia gains from oil price increases. They might actually be losing net when you consider net losses, when you consider the difference between costs and their sale price with the built-in discounts. So that's it for me.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight this event that happened yesterday or this night that further emphasizes Russia's coming struggles when it comes to gaining profits from their oil trade. Belgian special forces boarded a Shadow Fleet vessel with assistance from the French Navy. And I hope to see much more of these things happening soon, because I don't see any reason for holding back on these sort of operations when we already have burst the bubble on this, so to say. So yeah, it's a positive development, at least in this regard. Are there any more comments or questions or thoughts about latest developments from the panel? I guess not. Well, I think we are going to end it here. Thank you so much to everyone that joined. Thank you to Joseph. Thank you to Audax for joining us with Geschlittert, and always thank you so much for Stanimir for your very comprehensive report on the Russian economy and events in Russia. And thank you to Colby for joining us towards the end. And obviously, thank you to all the listeners and everyone in the comments field. Please stick around. We're going to be here for as long as it takes. Hopefully, the politicians will not be there for as long as it takes, but actually put an end to this so that Ukraine will be free one day. Thank you for listening, and see you again next Sunday. Slava Ukraini.
On behalf of the brave.